Walk into almost any church on a Sunday morning, and you'll find the pews full. But a global movement of millions insists the actual biblical day of rest happens 24 hours earlier, on Saturday. For Seventh-day Adventists, observing the seventh day functions as the ultimate cosmic test of human loyalty to the Creator. The origins of this conviction trace back to 1844. A group known as the Millerites had calculated that Christ would return to Earth that year. When the date passed and the world remained, the movement collapsed into the Great Disappointment. Instead of abandoning their faith, a small remnant of these believers returned to the source. They dove into an exhaustive re-examination of the Bible, searching for a foundation they might have missed. This seventh-day foundation emerged from that period of rigorous scriptural investigation. It was a calculated, text-based discovery intended to restore what they believed were forgotten biblical truths. The discovery spread through a specific human chain in the 1840s, passing from a Seventh-day Baptist named Rachel Oakes Preston to retired sea captain Joseph Bates, who became the movement's primary Sabbath advocate. Bates published a detailed tract on the subject, which eventually reached James and Ellen White. After checking his arguments against their own Bible study, both committed to keeping the seventh day. Ellen White accepted the Sabbath through this intellectual study of the text and Bates's reasoning, months before she ever recorded a vision regarding the day. When her confirming vision arrived in 1847, she described the heavenly sanctuary and the tables of stone, with a halo of light glowing specifically around the fourth commandment in the center of the Decalogue. This sequence, scriptural logic followed by visionary confirmation, gave the young movement the conviction that they had rediscovered God's original day of worship. The Adventist case begins at creation. They point out that God sanctified the seventh day when the world was still perfect, before the fall of man, and long before the existence of the nation of Israel. The text shows this requirement was active even before the Ten Commandments were given at Sinai. During the Exodus, God regulated the falling of manna for 40 years to ensure no work was done on the seventh day. Within the Ten Commandments, the Sabbath directive is longest, sitting in the exact center. An ancient ruler's seal required 3 markers: name, title, and territory. The fourth commandment contains all 3: the Lord, the Maker of heaven and earth. Because it carries these markers of authority, Adventists view the Sabbath as God's legal signature over the entire human race. While many assume Jesus replaced the Sabbath, he instead identified as its Lord, stating the day was created specifically for the welfare of humanity. He used the day to perform miracles of healing, deliberately stripping away the rigid, man-made restrictions that had turned the day into a burden rather than a rest. During the crucifixion weekend, Jesus' closest followers prepared spices on Friday, then remained at rest on Saturday according to the commandment, waiting until Sunday morning to visit the tomb. This practice continued decades after the cross, with the Apostle Paul routinely reasoning in synagogues and preaching to Gentile audiences specifically on the Seventh-day Sabbath. These New Testament examples serve to validate the day's original, restorative purpose, rather than marking its abolition. Modern Sabbath keeping follows a biblical sunset-to-sunset schedule, beginning Friday evening and concluding Saturday evening. Friday is treated as a preparation day. Chores, cooking, and shopping are finished before sundown to ensure the Sabbath hours are entirely free for worship. Following Isaiah 58, the day is framed as a 24-hour sanctuary dedicated to family, nature, and the Creator, setting aside one's own ways. This requires a full disconnection from commerce, business transactions, and secular employment. For the believer, this weekly cessation functions as a deliberate strike against the constant demands of modern economic life. In Adventist theology, this practice eventually moves to the center of a cosmic conflict called the Great Controversy, where the final issue facing humanity is the object of their worship. Their interpretation of Revelation suggests that world history is converging toward a final crisis, where every person must choose a side. On one side is the seal of God, identified as the sign of loyalty found in the Creator's Sabbath. On the other is the mark of the beast, a system of enforced false worship standing in opposition to God's law. In this prophetic framework, the Sabbath becomes the identifying marker that separates those who remain loyal to God from those who follow man-made traditions. The Church anticipates a future Sunday law, where civil powers will enforce a false day of worship as a solution to global social and political unrest. This prediction includes severe economic sanctions, where those who refuse to conform will be unable to buy or sell. The end-time remnant are those who will choose to honor the Seventh-day Sabbath, regardless of the personal or economic cost. For Seventh-day Adventists, every Saturday is a rehearsal for this moment, a weekly declaration of their origins and a pledge of allegiance to the Creator.